This coming Saturday, January 27th, is the anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz death camp in 1945. The United Nations has named it Holocaust Memorial Day. It's the annual international day of commemoration to remember the victims of the Holocaust. That means that people all over the world will pause to remember the people and the stories that were part of this terrible chapter in human history.
But remembering the Holocaust isn't just about looking at history books and old pictures. In my family, and millions of other families around the world, the Holocaust is a story about real people. Grandparents, moms and dads, and teenagers. It's a story of intolerance and fear, of blame, anger, and of millions who died. But it's also a story about survival, hope, and love. We can learn from remembering and telling these stories. So we asked my mom, Iris Safrir, to come in and talk to us about her story and what she thinks about on Holocaust Memorial Day.
One thing that I think is really important is to really remember that when we say 6 million Jewish people were murdered during the Holocaust, these are real people. The way I work to comprehend this is I reflect about our specific family story. And I want to learn more about my grandparents that I never met. My dad, for example, his parents were murdered when he was 13. He became an orphan. He had to look after himself. His siblings were murdered when he was a teenager. He went through death camps when he was a teenager. They were real people. His siblings were real people. They did what kids do, what teenagers do, what families do. And so when I think about them, that's how I want to think about them. They were real people, and it just makes me feel closer to them.
Why is knowing the stories of your family important?
What I figured out is that when I learn the stories about my parents, I understand my parents better. And that helped me a lot to understand why they behave the way they do, right? I mean, I think this is a pretty natural question for pretty much from teenager on. Why do my parents do certain things? It's really important to at least assume that everyone that we meet has a story and that there is a reason why they behave they do. And knowing that they have a story, they have history or her story, and it just softens the relationship between people. So that's why it's important to me.
What did you learn about yourself from hearing our family stories?
Once I learned these different behaviors and I understood where it's coming from because of the trauma that they went through during the Holocaust, I was able to say, okay, I really respect how they are handling themselves today in the world and how they do the best to raise a family. And I'm going to choose what from their behavior patterns I would like to do and what things really don't belong to me. For example, my parents were really, really scared of dogs because the way the Nazis used to use dogs to attack people during the war. And when I grew up, when I was a little girl, I was really afraid of dogs too. But then at age 9, I decided that I don't want to be afraid of dogs anymore. Once you learn to understand the behavior patterns of your parents, you can then make your own decision. What belongs to you, what doesn't belong to you, what do you want to keep, what do you have a lot of pride in, and what things maybe don't make sense anymore.
How can I ask about someone's story? Like, how can I get to know their story without saying what's the story?
I believe that we can start with very small things. For example, when you were a kid, or when you were my age, a teenager, what holidays did you use to celebrate? Or what kind of foods did you eat? So those are very, non-threatening questions. Everyone eats, everyone celebrates. And I think it's a really good entry point to then ask more questions. Because when someone tells you what kind of foods they like, you're like, oh, what occasion did you used to eat this food? Did you used to eat it with your grandparents? Did you used to eat it with, people of your age? And it's just kind of a nice entry point to learn more about the other person.
We love the idea that finding simple ways of asking people to tell us their stories can help us learn important things about them. instead of judging, we can understand something about why people do the things they do. So let's try it with each other. Your C2 advisors have pride cards, and your job is to talk to people around the room, students and teachers, and see how many signatures you can get to black out your card. These are simple questions we can ask each other to learn a little more and go beyond the single story. Do you know how to cook something?
Yeah, I do.
Don't be afraid to follow up and ask them to tell you a little more. What do you know how to cook?
I know how to cook cornbread.
Ooh, yum.